to At the Races with Steve Bick on SiriusXM Radio.
We're back, and a very apt musical return, because this is a jazzy version of "Hang 'Em High," the theme from from the Clint Eastwood classic. Jerry Brown is joining us, and it's always a treat when we get to talk to Jerry. He's got to be cajoled and handled. You know, he's got to be prompted for these conversations, but I'm glad we get a chance to talk. Jerry, good morning.
Yeah, good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank you for putting my sleeping habits out into the public domain last week.
Who told you about that? Because obviously you don't get up early enough to actually hear the show.
No, Aaron Yagoda turned on expecting to hear you interviewing me, and instead heard you saying that I don't get up before noon or something, which is not quite accurate. But I'm not on racetrack time. I'm on downtown New York part-time. And if you made figures for all these tracks and handicap and ran a business, you'd be drinking every night too.
Well, and you famously, you and the staff, and of course everybody's working remotely right about now. But when you guys were all piling into the office, and you were an evening operation, a late night operation for years.
Yeah, nobody came in before noon, and we had somebody there pretty much till 10 o'clock at night. We're starting to bring people back on a piecemeal basis. Try not to have more than 2 people in the office and 30 feet apart at any time. But yeah, we are mostly working remotely, and if you live a life at a certain time of day, it's very difficult to change it.
No doubt.
Even for you.
That's true. Well, and that's a great segue to the topic, and we'll hit on a few things today. But the motivation for reaching out to you was the news from the Jockey Club Roundtable that a project that I've been hearing from you the early stages, literally for 3-4 years, the idea of taking thorograph figures and utilizing them as a method to identify move-up performance that is not easily explained through just horsemanship. And you, in conversation with Jim Gagliano and the Jockey Club, you've urged them to do something along these lines, and they took it to McKinsey, and we've got this newfangled idea, an algorithms plus thorograph, to create an exceptional performance evaluation tool. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's basically right. Well, look, anybody who's a serious handicapper knows that there are certain trainers who we shall say are move-up trainers they're getting unusual performances, jump-ups. That's just not a new story. It's been going on since Oscar Barrera, and other people way back then who were getting these jump-ups, Pete Ferriola. I mean, a lot of people in the old days. But the problem is, over the years, there's more and more of them. And everybody knows who the ones are. Anybody seriously handicapping on a daily basis knows who the ones are on their circuit, or at least the ones to be suspicious of. Not necessarily what they're doing or whether they're doing, but you got to keep an eye on them. And to my knowledge, the 2 people in the industry who've been after this in terms of trying to solve this problem the longest are me and Barry Irwin, going way back. And when the Jockey Club first got interested in dealing with performance-enhancing drugs in 2008 with the Safety and Integrity Committee, they brought me in, and I told them what I had heard, and I had made myself sort of a central clearinghouse for information on the subject, and I was trying to get what information I could to the powers that be, and using the board on our website to talk about all these things and get people's attention. And what I would do, well, first of all, when I first went to the Jockey Club, I had already put in Freedom of Information Act requests into 3 states for TCO2 results. In fact, I had called into your show one time when you had California Rick Arthur on your show, and I was asking questions about TCO2 to him when he was on the air with you.
Yeah.
But that got me moving in that direction to try and get the information and begin to look at it, and it was very hard to get. California, for example, has a law, or at least did back then, where they could not give the information out. New York was forthcoming. Kentucky was not forthcoming. But I talked about this at Jockey Club. I told them what I thought the idea should be, and thereafter I stayed in contact with first Alan Marzelli, who had the job then, and now Jim Gagliano. And I would occasionally send them our sheets, Stargraph sheets, on horses that had jumped out of their skin for certain trainers. I would send a group of horses from one trainer at a time and show them. Also, Rick Arthur, by the way, I became pretty friendly with him. He would have me send him, there were guys he was suspicious of, and he would have me send him the sheets for all the starters of X trainer at that Del Mar meet, for example. So he could look at them and get an idea of whether he was right that they bore further scrutiny. So this was being done piecemeal over the years. And at some point, Jim Gagliano figured out that, they've obviously, given what's happened in the last couple of years, everybody knows that they've taken this much more seriously. The industry at large is finally starting to pay attention. The Jockey Club has gotten involved. They were the motivating force behind Navarro and the other guys getting nailed. They were the ones who hired the detective agency that came up with enough for probable cause for the wiretaps, at least as far as I understand the situation. That's what happened. Excuse me. And we were trying to figure out a way to incorporate our data in their surveillance, and not in terms of evidence, but in terms of pointing people in the right direction as to who to look at. And they couldn't just simply say, Jerry Brown says, look at these 4 guys. So they had to systematize it in some way, and they brought in McKinsey to do that. And I explained to them how our data worked, and I explained to them certain things. There's certain distinctions you have to make, like 2-year-olds improve rapidly. You can't look at 2-year-olds improvement. And a jump-up performance for a 5-year-old grass horse is a much more significant thing than for a 2-year-old dirt horse, that kind of thing. And they then developed an algorithm to find the trainers who are getting unusually high percentage of these jump-up performances in a short period of time. And you have to do it over a short period of time because these guys seem to run hot and cold. Some of them will get figures in one racetrack, for example, and not another. They'll do it for 3 months, and then they won't, which makes me think there's a vet involved, personally, more than a trainer. But the last single meeting I had before lockdown in New York was with the Jockey Club, Jim, and McKinsey guys. And when I got back to my office, they had sent me a list of 10 names the algorithm threw up as guys to watch, and I would have said yes to 9 out of 10. And I was probably wrong about the 10th. They were probably right about the 10th, too. So what they are doing appears to work, and now the racing offices around the country have access to that information.
That portion of it, when you say racing offices have that information, is there any directive that you know of, or how the racing office, what they can do with the tool, or is there, are we treading water until USATA and HISA is put in place before something like this can be actively, utilized as a watchdog? Because then, of course, the opportunity to do more out of competition testing. In fact, last week, Bill Finley wrote a piece about this and included some of these speculative execution elements.
Yeah. First of all, who would order the directive becomes the problem because there's no national body. And that has been a problem for our industry for as long as I've been involved in the industry. There's nobody to, maybe this HISA thing will change that if it actually goes through. Nobody knows whether it's going to go through. But maybe that'll change it. But in the meantime, it's up to those racing officers to do it. Some of them, I suspect, will have the will to do it. Some won't. Some will think it's a problem. Some won't. They all should. At least they have the information. and to be able to see on paper that this particular person has gotten, 5 suspect performances in the last 10 starts, that's kind of something that I would want to know. But whether they're going to do it, sometimes trainers have friends in the racing office. I don't know. The answer to your question is I don't know.
Fair enough. Let's talk about the figures and about the product, because there's probably going to be performances that get tripped by this that there may be legitimate explanation for. And I talk about Thorograph on the show regularly, and there's certain things, particularly at certain times of the year or in horses' form cycle, Jerry, that I'm actually hoping for a jump up performance, and I'll give you the easiest specific. One of the best additions to the statistics on Thorograph has been the sire Thorograph index, meaning the average performance of any sire's progeny at a certain age. And there's times of the year when 2-year-olds turn 3 and when 3-year-olds turn 4 and even 4-year-olds turn 5. If a horse disappears, let's say in September, and then turns up in the spring the next year, I look at that sire index, and when I see a horse on average, a sire, the progeny might be 4 or 5 points faster as a year older, that I jump on those horses, and it does make you wonder if a performance like that is going to be something that's going to be tripped by this, which is actually just natural development from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, etc.
Yeah. All right, two parts. First of all, I agree that's valuable information on the page, and I think the pedigree information that we have is vastly underused, especially the dam side pedigree. There are sires, or to some degree, their performance is a function of the level of mares they get, and there's less difference between a top sire and a poor sire than there is between a top broodmare and a poor broodmare. And the dam side information is, and that's simply because 100 mares are being bred to one stallion. So the stallions that are being stood are the top 2% of all of the possible stallions, but close to 100% of the mares are being bred. So a 50 percentile stallion is still a 99% male. A 50% mare, broodmare, is a 50% broodmare. So there's a greatly, way more divergence on the dam side than there is on the sire side. And the people who stand these horses know that, which is why they pack their books with great mares the first 2 years to try and make an impact immediately. But in terms of your question about this program, that's not how it works. In other words, that'll register as an individual performance, but that won't flag the trainer. What will flag the trainer is a multiple set. Whatever they're using, they could be using anything. But if they're using a rolling last 10 starts or rolling last 20 starts, whatever they're using, a significant number of those within a certain number of starts will trigger it. One jump up, you're absolutely right. Doesn't mean anything. When I'm doing figures, I'll notice that this guy got a big jump up, and if I see a second one from that person within, a week at the same track, I'm starting to pay attention. And if I see a third one, then I'm pretty sure that something's going on. Now, that's me personally, how I would do it. Whatever they put into the algorithm is whatever they put into the algorithm. And obviously, if some trainer has 100 horses, another trainer has 5 horses, the one with 5, those 5 starts are going to be spread over a month. So it's not going to help. It's not going to be as easy to catch or to see that person doing something as it would be able to see a person with a lot of starters.
Well, that makes me think the way you phrase that of my favorite Auric Goldfinger quote when he says to Bond, you're gonna be shocked at how apt this is. Once is happenstance. There's a saying in Chicago: once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, third time is enemy action.
Right. That's basically it. And what they did was they found some way to make it so that the decision is not being made by a person, which is really what they had to do. It had to be done in some way that the flag goes up when certain things happen I mean, what I'd be looking at, if I was doing this myself manually, I'd be looking at however many, and if 3 of these happen in the course of 10, I would then look at the guy's next 10. That's the way I would do it. 3 would be the flag, and the next 10 would be the ones that I would look at. By the way, just as an aside,
yeah.
Most of the people listening to your show and I and you are horse players, okay,
yes.
Aside from being industry professionals. And what people don't realize about this drug program, drug problem, okay, in the game, is that the tote system is a market, like the stock market is a market. The mutual pools are a market. And every time a horse is drugged, somebody knows it. And they are essentially trading on inside information. And they are taking money out of your pocket and my pocket. And you can have a horse that we look at and we think fair value on the horse is 4-1, and it's 5-2, and so we can't bet it. But somebody else knows that fair value that day is even money, because they know the horse is not the same horse he was 3 weeks ago. And they're able to bet on that information into the pools, and that is giving them a tremendous advantage and taking money out of all our pockets.
Well, and on that topic, actually, since that comes up, once we've massaged this through and considered the elements of this, I do want to use that as a segue to something else. But undoubtedly, I mean that has been from the horse player side, from the ownership breeder side, there has been, there's been the other element, which is, again, an unlevel playing field that is tilted away from the people that are playing the game on a pure level, and so there's nobody rooting for those that are taking an edge. I do want to ask Jerry, though, because you've had the Thoroughgraph, the Graph Racing team, and have owned plenty of horses, and have purchased horses using FIG information and campaigned them or acted as an agent, and sometimes you actually got paid acting as an agent. The middle ground in this conversation, and by that I'm referring to guys that are not taking an edge, but are using every legal therapeutic and throwing the kitchen sink at claims, and basically doing everything legally possible and permissible, and running up in some cases monthly vet bills of $3,000-$4,000 over and above the regular day rate, and have horses that perform better under those conditions. And those horses are never going to test. People may think, if they do test, it might be for a therapeutic overage, but they're not going to test for something nefarious, because there's nothing nefarious about throwing the kitchen sink and injecting joints and trying to get horses to be as good as they can be using legal therapeutics. How does that fit into this equation?
Well, first of all, a few years ago, Thoroughbred Daily News ran a story on the drug issue in the country, and one of the things they pointed out was the tremendous variance of the rules from state to state on what drugs can be used. And the example I think that stuck out to me was Florida. There was way more things that were legal there, higher thresholds and everything else, at least at that point, than in some other states. And in California, I think from what I can tell, they're more serious about it than any place else. Kentucky's pretty serious about it now too. But that's a problem that the handicappers have to deal with. There are certainly trainers who get better figures out of their horses in Florida than they do when they come back to New York, and vice versa. There was at least one guy a few years ago whose horses weren't running in Florida at all, and everybody brought him up here, and I think 16 out of 17 consecutive horses ran either their top or a new top. I mean, and then they were getting bets. Somebody knew. So, both in terms of the legal and the illegal, racing does not understand what football understands. Football has injury lists because they understand how important transparency is, and they're not even a game which is based on gambling. There's gambling on it, and they're trying to keep it as clean as they can, but that's not where they make their money. This business makes its money on gambling, and because they had a monopoly for so long and just had to show up and turn a key and make money, they don't understand that transparency is the bettor's friend and is crucial. And this goes from everything from the uncoupled entries to a whole bunch of other things where bettors pay attention and they get demoralized. And if they think they're not getting a fair shake, they go someplace else.
Yep.
And sports betting is a very large truck on its way towards this industry right now, unless the industry gets its act together.
No, that part, I think everybody agrees on the competitive landscape on that front. But on that specific topic, I mean, when you talk about the various jurisdictions, that a number of things on that front has improved, frankly, and that includes, the adoption of the widespread adoption of the model rules, where we've got the list of therapeutic allowable, the 27 allowable therapeutic medications that has been widely adopted, including in Florida, where it was considered Wild West. I mean, one of the problems wasn't necessarily always rules as much as it was. Florida barely has a regulatory body paying attention to the game. I mean, they've got a bureau that handles licensing, but go find yourself the agency in Tallahassee that is actually doing testing and keeping track of stuff. On
that note, one of the things that I brought up to the Jockey Club several times, and I was told, quote, there is no appetite for this, end quote. One of the things that needs to be done is test results need to be posted on the internet on a timely basis. In other words, races this week, they're testing the next couple of days. By next week, the results of those tests should be up. What they tested for and what the readings were, because the public has to know that the testers are actually tested. And there have been too many instances where it turned out that tracks weren't testing, or they weren't testing for basic stuff like milkshakes, and we have to know as an industry that that's taking place, because the foundation of all your actions, like we have to be harsher on people and penalties need to be great, that's based on the idea that people are testing.
Right.
And that people who are doing things are actually being caught. And if that's not taking place, then the whole thing goes out the window. So that's one of the things. Two things I've been pushing for over the years are freezing and retesting and publishing of test results. And when people say, well, if you publish test results, I know what you're testing for, if you're going to freeze them and test them again later, they don't know what you're testing for. Because while the people who are using stuff are ahead of the people doing the testing, they're not ahead of where they're going to be in 5 years. And if somebody's got to worry about not just getting a positive, but getting 15 positives a few years later, which is going to be a life sentence if they get caught, they're much less likely to screw around. And those are the kind of serious actions that the industry has to take if it means business.
You obviously have confidence that the mechanics of this, and do you, beyond your figures, do you know much about the algorithms that McKinsey developed at all?
No. I gave them guidelines in terms of that you have to view different ages differently and different surfaces differently. A jump up on grass is a much bigger deal. I mean, for horses already been running on grass, they are much less likely to throw a big number out of nowhere than a dirt horse is, for example. And I had them watch out for things like surface changes and Lasix on and basic other things that could explain a move up. But they then took all that and did what they did with it. I don't know. At one point they said they were using AI, artificial intelligence, on it. I don't know whether that's correct or not, but they came up with some systematized way of doing it. I do not know what it is.
All right. When you talk about some of those variables, you would think that surface switches and, off track. I mean, very frequently you'll see a horse jump up on an off track that they'd never been on before, and then regress off of that. I'll give you an example of an older horse, a 4-year-old, the circumstances involving Tripoli with John Sadler winning the Pacific Classic. I mean, here's a horse that was just okay, was an allowance-y type on grass. Turned out he was a dirt horse all along, even though he was a kitten's joy, and now he's put in 3 terrific efforts on dirt, and it might look like an aberrant performance, but it's just this is what the horse was meant for. I mean, there's obviously going to be circumstances like that, but you addressed this when you said, a trainer in question is going to have multiple horses in the barn that fall under the aberrant category.
Yeah, and in that case, because the surface switch, if they're doing what they should be doing, it wouldn't flag anyway. I mean, if a horse just moves up to change surfaces, it's not going to flag. That's not going to be an aberrant performance. Let's say the horse got on dirt, which he did, and established a level, and then jumped forward. He didn't jump forward that much in Pacific Classic, but he jumped forward a huge amount in Pacific Classic, then that one would flag. Not to switch to dirt, that wouldn't flag. But once he had established a level on dirt and then jumped to a new level, that would be something that would be noted. It wouldn't by itself cause a trainer to be flagged, but that individual performance would be flagged. And if the trainer got, 3 of them in 6 starts or 8 starts,
right,
then that would presumably put him on a list somewhere. And again, this is not being used as evidence. It's only being used to point people in the right direction as to where to look.
Yeah, it's a barometer.
Yeah.
The thorough pattern, and basically, Jerry, we could really we could really kind of advertise and explain some of the bells and whistles, because in a marketplace where the term performance figure and speed figure is generally thought of as a single number and a single evaluation of a horse's performance. One of the things that differentiates Thorograph in general is all these things that you've continually added to the product. I mean, you talked about the sibling and mare numbers. To me, in fact, I just opened up a page. Here's Barraza in the Del Mar Derby from the other day, and Into Mischief, for instance, back to that Thorograph index. His 2-year-olds average 15.5. That's with a base of 500 plus. His 3-year-olds an 11.5, so a 4-point improvement from 2 to 3. Then they improved 2 more points to a 9 3/4 as 4-year-olds, and they even improved 1 more point to 8 3/4 as a 5 or older, as older horses. I mean, that's one of my go-tos. And the thorough pattern, which you introduced maybe 5 years ago?
More than that. We're all getting old, Steve.
I guess, maybe.
It's probably like 10, but yeah.
But that's incredible if it is. But what's amazing about this is it tracks the number of performances that come out on the 4 categories of a top, a pairing, an off performance, or an X performance, and one of the things you would imagine with the kinds of candidates for this performance evaluation tool is particularly horses that were at a certain level, get claimed, let's say, and then either return to that level of performance or exceed it. I mean, is that a fair characterization of what the thing is going to particularly look for?
If there's a trainer change involved, it's not supposed to be counted in that sample size. Because it can be because of a trainer change that the horse gets better or worse. The thorough pattern in general is for people who have not used the data that long, because there's so many exceptions. I mean, you and I both have looked at this data for a long time, and we would see, for example, that the second and third races back were close together, and there's more time into the last one. There's all kinds of things which go into your handicapping of pattern handicapping, which is what we're doing by putting the figures on a graph that differentiate this from other types of handicapping. If you listen to Andy Serling or anybody talking about a race, the preponderance of their analysis is always the last race. Last time out, this horse, XYZ, and, he had a bad trip, he had a good trip, he should have won, whatever it's going to be. And their focus is on one performance as if that is simply the level of the horse. And circumstances will dictate whether he runs better or worse. The reason we put the figures on a graph is that we believe, as you used the word form cycle before, and that's correct, we believe that horses move towards big efforts, react to big efforts depending on the individual horse. There are horses who are much more consistent than others. There are trainers who get much more consistent performances than others do. Chad Brown comes to mind. Time between races is a factor. All these things go into our analysis that a horse will run, not just how good he is, but that it'll run better or worse today. And by the way, what's really interesting is Maggie Wolfendale, when she talks about races, she's very often doing what amounts to our type of analysis in terms of this horse looks better today than it did last time. It's going to run better than it did. Or I've seen him looking better, it's going to run worse than it did. And that's essentially what people using Thoroughgraph are doing. We're not simply looking at how fast each horse is. We're trying to figure out how close to his optimum performance he's going to run today, or in some case better than his optimum performance he's going to run today. And even though he got beat by this horse last time, even if circumstances are exactly the same, we'll play him to beat that horse this time. He's moving forward. The other horse figures to bounce. And that's a completely different type of analysis we do than other people do.
There's a lot to this, and it'll be exciting and ideally productive to see how it works, how it gets executed.
I hope so. I mean, it should be. Again, this comes down to how seriously people in the industry are taking this problem. They have not taken it seriously enough up to now, which is what I've been screaming about now for 15 years. But the Jockey Club clearly is. And they have influence, and that has been a major factor in moving this entire thing forward. Stuart Janney was running that committee when I was talking to him back then. He clearly cared about it. Jim does, Gagliano does. And them being involved, putting money up to do this, McKinsey costs money. And getting them involved and doing it the right way, not doing things like looking at win percentage, which can be a function of a million things, but actually looking at levels of performance and coming up with a regimented way of doing it. Hopefully now people have a tool that they can actually use to get on this problem.
Well, while it's very encouraging that your advocacy for this concept took root on this front, you couldn't talk them out of their LASIK's holy grail pursuit.
It was not for lack of trying. The last time I was on the show, you might recall, was this weekend last year. You, me, and Eric Hamelback, and I actually had a conversation the other night with a racetrack executive very sharp guy, by the way, who has a very strong opinion on this question that LASIK should be banned. And in conversation, it became clear that he didn't know anything about the arguments about why it should not be banned. It was completely new territory to him that it created all kinds of problems for the handicapper, which we talked about on the air last time. Right. It creates problems for racing officers. I mean, fields in California are small already, and the Europeans, all those Europeans go to California because they're bleeders in Europe, and they're not coming there.
Right.
So now their fields are going to be shorter, and owners who put money in these things are going to have an even harder time getting their money out. And this is just there's not a single good thing for the industry. I mean, not it's a sport question. There are people who want to ban it for sporting reasons. And certainly commercial breeders want to ban it for their own self-interest reasons. But in terms of the interest of the industry itself, the players in the industry, the trainers, the owners, the professionals, the bettors, this is a disaster. It's a slow-moving disaster, and because there's a stigma attached to horses bleeding as you and I have talked about. People aren't talking about this, but I'm hearing about it. And a lot of horses are bleeding, and the trainers have been keeping their mouths shut about it. But at some point, there's going to be an incident on national television where somebody's going to bleed externally in a big race, and there's going to be a huge outcry. And as you have said to me, people will not be saying bring back Lasix. They're going to be saying bad racing.
Yep. There's no doubt, and it also, back to a unfair. An unfair advantage. The scenario also plays into the hands of the wealthiest owners who can afford to take a horse and put it on the farm for 6 months and give it hyperbaric chamber treatments and and then try it again. It's partly designed to potentially push out people who don't have the deepest pockets and the financial wherewithal to carry horses like that, and that to me is also an unspoken and under examined part of this.
It was spoken by Sid Fernando. He described it as class warfare. You're right.
I've used that same. I've considered this thing completely a class warfare issue from word go. I don't want to get bogged down on that because there is a topic as well that that train path, that set of tracks is going in a certain direction, and wherever it goes, we'll follow. Meanwhile, when you talk about the players and having a unbalanced playing field again, I want to ask you, it's been a very interesting summer regarding the computer-assisted wagering groups and their influence in pools. NYRA has been very frankly generous in terms of excluding them from the multi-race pools, including the new $1 pick 6, the late pick 5 from its introduction, as well as the cross-country pick 5. Then they moved to try to limit the influence of the late money by instructing the groups that they'd have to shut off 3 minutes to post. That really got under their skin, and according to Matt Hegarty about 2 weeks ago, they've taken their ball and gone elsewhere with it because of that. Talk about, Jerry, because I don't think you and I have had this conversation on air. What's your impression? You're an individual player. You're not batch betting, computer style. What's your view of this, and how much do you perceive the groups have as a percent of the pools, and is the liquidity they provide, is it a positive or is it a negative?
First of all, I don't understand what that liquidity thing actually means. I mean, it's not like the pools are illiquid now. That there's money in there, you can get it out if you cash your ticket, so they're liquid. Okay, as far as that goes, all right, complicated subject. First of all, what it is. I was approached when this kind of stuff first began in this country. It was taking place elsewhere, Hong Kong first. But I was approached to get involved, and it looked like I was going to for a while, but the thing blew up. There are two components. One is a handicapping component, one is a betting component. The handicapping component is basically using a computer to come up with what theoretically is an accurate percentage chance of every horse winning. You're making your own line, the computer's doing it, weighing what all the factors are supposed to be. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's, somebody builds a better handicap and mousetrap, that's fine. That component's not the problem. The second component is taking that and being allowed by the tracks to interface directly with the betting pools. So when you and I handicap, if we're handicapping tomorrow, we look at, race 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, we've got it down to 2 or 3 horses. We have an opinion, and we're going to bet one of these horses. That's not what this does. This thing does not have an opinion. It has an odds line, and then it meshes at the last split second with the tote system to ferret out the underlays and bet based on those overlays. Bet based on those overlays at the last split second in hundreds of combinations. It basically has an ability to be efficient that the normal player does not have. What Naira just did with the win pool, which is to cut him out at 3 minutes, is if those guys want to bet at 3 minutes, it's fine. They don't have an advantage that can't be overcome at 3 minutes. They have an advantage at the last split second, having the ability to do all those things which a normal player does not have. And by the way, Naira is not telling them you can't bet the last 3 minutes. It's telling them you can't bet this way in the last 3 minutes. You can take your handicapping, you can take your line, and bet the way Steve Bik or Jerry Brown bets for the last 3 minutes with a touch screen. They can still do that. But they announced they're not going to do that. And by announcing they're not going to do that, they're making it clear that they need that unfair advantage, which everybody else doesn't have. You and I don't have that. We don't have the ability to interface the pools. By the way, what this is like, imagine being at a chess tournament or poker game where they're allowing some players to sit at a table with a computer and some players not to.
Correct.
Okay, I mean, it'd be a joke. Nobody would say, oh, that's okay. It's not okay in that situation. So the ability, the handicapping thing, fine. Handicap however you want it. Use a computer, come up with a line, that's fine. But then you got to put your bets in the same way I do, or if you're going to put them the other way, you got to put them in early enough that it doesn't give you last look at the pools. And, by the way, screw it up for the rest of us who are trying to figure out what the odds are going to be. That situation that went down at Del Mar 3 weeks or a month ago, I happened to bet that horse. I mean, it was 9-2 when it went in the gate, and it crossed the wire at 9-5. That's terrible. I mean, it was one of 3 co-favorites in the multis. And, yeah, it was probably 3-1, 7-2 in the multis. And what ended up happening, apparently, was 2 different batch groups made enormous bets on the horse at the last flash, driving it down probably below what their odds would have said it would have been. But this is unsustainable because what's happening is those groups are, because they haven't, the pari-mutuel system, as I said before, is players playing against each other. We're not playing against the house.
Right.
And if any, forget Naira. Naira's actually, as you said, better than most about this, far better than most. A lot of the other tracks are just, Katie bar the door with this stuff. You want to do it, come on and do it. If the tracks decide they want to give big players a rebate, that's fine. That's their money they're giving away. They're giving part of the takeout away. But if they're allowing people in the pools with an unfair advantage against you and me, that's our money they're giving away. Your money and my money. That's not okay. They're giving these people the opportunity to feast on the rest of the general public. And number one, it's not fair. Number two, it's not sustainable. Those guys are only going to stick around as long as the general public is in the pools in large quantities to bet. And if you wipe those people out, the other guys are not horse players. These guys with these CAWs, computer-assisted wagering systems. They're siphons. They're only there to take that money away. And when those people are gone, first of all, as those people bet less, they're going to bet less because they can't bet as much into the pools with less money to win. They start killing their own prices. And eventually, they're going to be gone completely. And you're going to have a bunch of people. The takeout is high enough already. It's higher than any other form of gambling, basically. It's sports betting especially. And now, with these guys in the pools, you've increased the takeout even higher. So if I'm coming into the game, I actually said this on the air with you last year. I mean, if I'm coming into the game now, I bet sports. It's a lower takeout. There's no learning curve. There's a tremendous learning curve in our game about, all the different angles. Just about what you talked about with the TGI, with the breeding information. It's tremendously sophisticated stuff for somebody who's just walking in off the street. That's not true with baseball, football, or basketball. We all grew up with those things. So somebody can sit down and just play that game watching a television. And racing does not understand how precarious its position is. Almost everything that's been added that's changed, whether it's the Lacey's rule that's now been changed or the CAW thing, this is, or sports betting being on the rise, has created a situation that's worse for racing. None of those things make it better. One thing has made it better is the increased exposure on television, especially the Naira show, which have developed a lot of new players, and that's great for getting new players into the game. But keeping them there is a whole different ballgame, because you and I both know a lot of sophisticated players, including myself, who are betting less than they used to just because it's so much harder to find something worth betting on. and you're afraid to go in at, with 2 minutes to post, seeing a horse that's 7-2, and you're afraid it's going to go 8-5.
Yeah, no doubt, and the way in which pretty much the month of August, because this started specifically with the wind pools. This started in New York in late July, and there's really only one person I saw out on social media. In fact, it was on the Thoroughgraph board. It was on your page, Bhaskar. Obama, Bhaskar,
right.
What's his name?
Bhaskar Barrera, yeah.
Bhaskar Barrera. He was the only person that, and Andy Serling and I kind of tracked it and were curious because I knew about it at the end of July, and we just sort of waited, and he was the only person who said something is different because the odds aren't fluctuating the way they had been. And then weeks later, basically 2-3 weeks later, when word came out, when Matt Hegarty wrote about it, and Joe Longo and Naira basically let it out, it was actually Dave O'Rourke at the Albany Law Conference where it officially leaked word. It became apparent that we weren't getting the same violent fluctuations on the board. So there is a solution for, one of the things, Jerry, that when you talk in these topics, it bothers me when people say nobody cares and no one's doing anything, when in fact there's a lot of people that care at every level, and whether it's executives or whether it's steering organizations, whether it's players that have the ear of managements, track managements. I mean, there's people out there that are trying to address any and all of these issues, and it's just that there's so many of them that it's hard, and it feels overwhelming when in fact, if you took a snapshot right now, things actually probably are a lot better than they were a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, it depends what specific area you're talking about. But I want to. You mentioned this thing about the. I also was told that this was happening, and I was told it was going to cost Naira a bunch of money in the wind pool. But again, I think I said this before. It's important to really look at that. The fact that we're not going to play because you're not giving us an advantage. That's what that is. Okay? They could still bet. And they could bet early. But they are saying that because we don't have both the elements in place, we are not going to play. They're admitting they have an advantage. Without that advantage, you're not going to play. It's a crucial point.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. Very true. Very true. There's so many parts of this. I mean, there's reports of them getting preferential rates that are below market to play. It is really onerous, and I don't think anybody, Jerry, and then you can correct me, but I know you agree on this front because you're offering things in the Thoroughgraph Plus packages. You're trying to give people, no matter how small their handle is, you're trying to give them something value added. We all understand. Almost everybody's involved in some kind of business life, outside horseplay. We understand volume discounts and giving some, value add to, your biggest customers. That's typical in business. But when it's to the complete detriment of a larger percentage, when people that are responsible, let's say for 35% of the volume are getting an unfair advantage on the people that are 65% of the volume, the tail's wagging the dog here.
It's unsustainable. Yeah. I mean, it's a sugar high. They think they're getting, we got all this handle from these guys, but it's not sustainable. You can't have those people winning without your regular everyday players losing. And the takeout is high enough to begin with. You know,
Right.
and again, you and I know lots of people. I know a couple. I'm going to track today with one of them, who he was here every day of the meet for probably 15 years in a row. He lives in Albany. And he basically 6 or 8 times the entire meet now. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people who they've moved their action over to betting sports. Look, I'm on a string, a text string with a bunch of guys who are all, I bet them all through racing, with one exception. And none of the discussion on this string is about racing. You know, it's about the line on, you know, Kershaw tonight and, you know, various other sports-related things. I mean, both for betting sports and just sports, you know, as a fan. But it's not about racing. Occasionally something will come up about racing, but that's not where the focus is. And these guys are lifelong horse players. And all this stuff has just turned them off. It's just too hard. You know, you've taken a game that actually was difficult, but could be beaten at least sometimes. You had some winning years, kind of thing, and they've made it much tougher. And they're letting one group of people take the money away from another group of people. That's one of the other problems. I mean, it's really. And by the way, what we said about the customers there, this is not a small point. Think about the LASIK decision. Did anybody ask horse players what they wanted?
No.
You know,
God,
when
no.
they went to synthetics, did anybody ask for horse players what they wanted? That was the stupidest idea in the world.
Yep.
You know, horse players have learned to handicap one way their entire lives, and all of a sudden, okay, we're going to change everything, and we're going to have different synthetics at different tracks, and we're not going to ask you what you like. And now you're the customers, take it or leave it. I mean, that's essentially what they did. And the LASIK thing, nobody asked, you know, horse players what they wanted. And on this question of the CFWs, nobody's asking horse players what they want. You know, this is your customers, man. I don't do that with my customers.
No.
You know?
No. In fact, you're the opposite. You give them more without even being asked.
Yeah, we tried. I mean, you know, it's pretty basic. You know, you don't have to kill yourself to give a good product. I mean, and to give, you know, we have the thing at the end of the year, every year for 6 days where we give the sheets away for free,
Right.
all data
That's
away
right.
for free.
That's right.
You know, I mean, to show thank you for the rest of the year. It's not like that complicated. It's not some, you know, racing does not appear to operate as other businesses operate.
No.
And it doesn't work. It worked for a long time because they had a monopoly on gambling, but it's not true anymore. And it's going to hurt them if they don't make adjustments.
No, well, you've introduced Theragraph Player Services and the Theragraph Extra, and you put these deals together, you know, with the different tracks. I mean, you've been so proactive in so many areas, and you know, trying to obviously grow your business, but your business is tied directly to the big business, you know, the games business. So the games health is your interest and dedication. I'm just glad. I'm glad that in this particular case, the idea from 4 or 5 years ago took root, and you know, the utilizing of the figures toward a tool to help whatever governing agency is going to be proactive in rooting out attempts to cheat. I mean, that just builds confidence. That's one of the things in general that stewards of the game should ask themselves: is this going to inspire more confidence from stakeholders and horse players?
Yeah, just ask your customer base. Talk to your customer base. By the way, you mentioned TGPS. Let me just talk about that for a second. That's essentially a partnership we have with New York Racing Association, where people effectively bet to our website, and it goes into the NYRA pools, not just on NYRA tracks, but on other tracks also. It's NYRA with NYRA bets effectively, and we give them discounted or free data to bet that way. And you're right. That's another service. That's for not the biggest players, but ideally bigger than average players. Most of those guys probably bet, I don't know, 300 in a given day, something like that. But yeah, that's the kind of thing we do. And right now, we have deals with Delmar and Keeneland where people can play those tracks and get free data for those tracks. So, yeah, I mean, those are the kind of things that the industry should be doing more of in general, finding ways to give something to the players, and not just to attract new players, but to give something to the existing players, because they are the backbone of your business, man. You know, the guys who've been playing the horse for a long time and understand the game, taking the trouble to learn the game, are your customers. Take care of them.
In all these different capacities, in promoting a level playing field, which benefits everybody, stakeholders and horsemen and players, and everything that trickles down from it. So, Jerry, as always, always great to listen to you, and appreciate how vociferously and how dedicatedly you go after these topics, and no one can doubt how sincere and how seriously you take all of this. You're one of the people that everybody looks to for direction on topics like this.
I'll talk to you next Labor Day weekend, and now I'm going back to sleep.
Jerry Brown, everybody. There it is. At Thorograph.com, Jerry Brown, and helping the industry address one of the great frustrations, and that is identifying and rooting out attempts to cheat. And Jerry's got a valuable tool in that with Thorograph, and he first told me about this 5 years ago. Amazing. All right, let's take a break, and in fact, it might even be toward the end of the show as well, and because I'm not sure how long we went, but either way, I'll thank Jerry, and back after this.
Thanks, Steve.
Sirius XM Radio.
Nice.
That was good.
Very good, Jerry. You were great. You were great. Yeah.
Well, it's going to shake some people up.